Veronica, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you, Linda. Can you hear me? Well, good. Well, thank you, Jeroen, for that very interesting presentation in Koen. I will chair the final session, and there will be more talk on finance and financial incentives, deposit contracts. And it is a great honor. Jamie, Rosen, and David de Buisonjé already introduced themselves at the beginning of the conference, but I will do it briefly for those who logged in later on. Now, it's a great honor to have Jamie Rosen with us. He's CEO of Waybetter in New York, and he is also affiliated to Leiden University. And David de Buisonjé, he's a PhD student at Leiden University, specializing in deposit contracts, financial incentives, and what we should or should not do in terms of helping people change their lifestyle. First of all, Jamie and David, thank you very much for this great initiative in organizing this symposium. It's been very valuable seeing all the questions in the chat and all that discussion. It steers up. So there will be time for discussion at the end of your session and a wrap up. That will be 6 to 6:15. So please stay with us, and we will have more time for questions and discussion then. David, can you start with your talk, please?
Definitely. Thank you for the introduction, Veronica. I'm going to wait until my slides appear. That might take a small while. And I think there they are. And then I'm getting the remote control over my slides, and I'm able to click through them. Great. So yeah, I've been introduced before, so let me get straight to the point. I'm going to talk to you about deposit contracts for physical activity that we ran 2 field experiments with using a smartphone application. The title of my talk will be Less Carrot, More Stick, because these are loss-based financial incentives. So I have control again. A brief overview of what I will talk about. Firstly, I will generally introduce deposit contracts, the idea behind them. Then I will explain experiment 1, where we investigated the effects of these incentives. And I will close with the preliminary results of a second experiment where we try to increase the uptake of deposit contracts. So first, the problem of health behavior change. I think it looks something like this. On the one hand, we have unhealthy temptations, and they are concrete, certainly attainable, and immediately rewarding. And they are at odds with our healthy life goals, such as losing weight, which are more abstract, more uncertain, and provide only a delayed reward. That makes behavior change difficult. Now, Odysseus in Greek mythology already had a quite good solution to this issue of temptation. In the famous story, he was sailing the seas and had to bring his boat and his crew back into his safe home harbor. And in doing so, he knew that he would have to pass the beautiful sirens with their beautiful singing, who would seduce him to steer his ship into the rocks instead of into the safe harbor. So in all of his wisdom, Odysseus foresaw this temptation problem, and he asked his crew to tie him to the mast of the ship, to plug his ears with wax, and to make sure that he couldn't steer the ship the wrong way, so that he would be able to safely reach home. So what Odysseus used is what I would call a commitment device. And a commitment device is defined as a tool that my current self can use to commit my future self to a future course of action. And a deposit contract, in my definition, is a monetary form of a commitment device where own money of the participant is used as a commitment force. So practical examples that we know about is, for example, the application Stick, where people incentivize themselves. They enter into a deposit contract with themselves, and in this case, they decide where the money goes if they lose their challenge. So in this case, to an anti-charity, for example, their least favorite political party. Another example is StepBet. Jamie will talk more about that later. This is a social form of deposit contract where people enter into group challenges, and the money that is lost by losers is paid out to the winners. So theoretically, what do we know about these deposit contracts? We expect that they have superior effects on behavior compared to a regular reward due to loss aversion. And loss aversion is the finding that people respond psychologically more strongly to losses than they do to gains or rewards of an equivalent size. However, this could also lead to an inferior uptake, so problems with the actual participation in this kind of intervention due to the same loss aversion. People might not want to risk putting money in a contract that they can lose. However, there's one huge advantage of these incentives, and that is that they are self-provided instead of externally provided. That means they have the potential for large-scale implementation. In a study, Patel applied these concepts of loss aversion and assigned people with a 7,000 steps per day step goal. In one condition, in the gain condition, they could then earn $1.4 every day that they were successful. And in the loss condition, they got $42 upfront, but then lost $1.4 every day that they were not successful. In this study, the loss framed incentive was more effective than the gain framed incentive. And now my slides got a little bit stuck. I'm trying to, yeah, there it is. But it was still merely a reward that was made to feel like a loss. So there was no actual deposit required here. So that this study does not provide any evidence on actual uptake of this intervention. That led to our experiment because we wanted to see if when we actually require people to make a deposit beforehand, if that works to increase physical activity in a randomized controlled trial. So we hypothesized that when we actually require a deposit, that uptake would be lower compared to when we just give people a reward. I think that makes sense, but that it would be more effective than a reward, and that a loss frame would also be more effective than a gain frame. So the method that we use for this is we recruited 98 healthy students. They used a smartphone-based intervention for 20 days in March 2020. They received a tailored step goal by the application based on their historic step average plus 20% to make it challenging. If no data was available, they got a 10,000 steps default goal. That proved to be a problem. I'll get back to that later. They got feedback, which was either loss framed or gain framed. An incentive, which was either a deposit that they had to pay before the experiment, which was 10 euros. They received a tikkie, which is a digital bank transfer request in the application. Or they received a reward after the intervention, also of 10 euros. So the design was a 2x2 with 4 conditions, and our primary outcomes were the uptake, so how many people participated in this intervention, and the effectiveness measured in days goal achieved based on their objectively registered step counts. So the conditions look like this. We had to invent a trick to create the framing, which was the pot, and the pot was in the reward gain frame condition empty at the start, and when people were successful, it filled along the way. In the reward loss frame condition, the pot was full at the start, and when people were not successful, money was subtracted and the pot emptied along the way. Remember, in both conditions, people are basically earning money. In contrast to the deposit conditions, where people deposited money, in the gain frame, again, they were earning money during the intervention, and in the loss frame, they were losing money. This is what the application looked like. It was a conversational agent which provided people with their daily step count every day, with a conclusion, whether they succeeded or failed, whether they earned something or whether they lost something, and an overview of their running total during the intervention, which was the pot. So going into the results of this study, we expected lower uptake for the deposits, and we saw a high uptake in the reward conditions. 92% of the participants participated. And in the deposit condition, we saw 55% uptake. So that's a significant difference and a much lower uptake, in fact. So we accept the first hypothesis that deposits have a lower uptake than rewards. Then looking at the effectiveness of the intervention, we have on the vertical axis the number of days that the goal was achieved. Maximum was 20. And on the horizontal axis, we have the different conditions. And we expected deposits, the 2 blue bars, to be more effective than the rewards. The means are in the expected direction, but this was not a significant difference. So we reject that hypothesis. Secondly, we expected loss frames, again, the 2 blue bars in the graph now, to be more effective than gain frames. And here the descriptors were in the opposite direction. It looked like gain frames worked better. However, this was not significantly different. So again, this hypothesis was rejected. There was, however, a problem with goal setting, which I alluded to earlier. 20 out of the 65 participants got the 10,000 steps default goal, while the mean of people that got a tailored goal was about 5,000 steps. That means that this default goal was too rough of an estimate and probably unachievable for most. Therefore, we re-ran the analyses, excluding those 20 people, and then found still that deposits were not more effective than rewards. But now the gain frames were more effective than the loss frames, significantly more effective. And this was a strong effect. In the gain frame condition, people achieved 16 out of 20 goals, and in the loss frame condition, about 11. So quick discussion about this study before I move to the next. The gain frames appeared unexpectedly to be superior to loss frames. That's in contrast with the often cited study by Patel. However, they studied obese adults and we studied the healthy student population. So that could explain the discrepancy between our findings. The deposits in our case were not superior to rewards. And although theory predicts that they should be, no studies, including ours, have yet shown it. So that's still up for, interesting for further research. In our case, it could be related to a power issue because there was limited uptake of the deposits. We had not enough participants possibly to detect the effects that might have been there. So future work should study how to improve uptake. That was the aim of our second experiment, which I will now briefly go into. The aim of this study was how can we improve this 55% uptake of deposit contracts, because that's an important obstacle to implementation. So we took a moment and thought about what could be obstacles for people to use these deposit contracts. And one thing could be that 10 euro is not the right amount for everybody. Some people might need more money to be stimulated. Other people might need less money or do not want to put in 10 euros. So the size of the deposit could be an obstacle. Secondly, the deposit was purely loss-based. So there was nothing to win for people in deposit conditions. They deposited money and they could lose it, but they couldn't win anything. So that could also be an obstacle. So our question for the second study was, how can we make the deposit more attractive and increase their uptake? Two solutions were implemented. Firstly, customizing of the deposit size. So instead of requiring a fixed amount of 10 euros, take it or leave it, we offered the opportunity to choose between 1 and 20 euros of deposit size. We hypothesized that this would increase feelings of autonomy over the intervention and would allow people that are possibly reluctant to participate to give in a small deposit or to make a deposit that fits them best. Secondly, we introduced matching or doubling of the amount that people deposited. So when in the first experiment, people merely made a deposit, now we added a reward of the same size that doubled their total incentive. We hypothesized that this would increase the attractiveness of the intervention and would introduce elements of positive reinforcement to the existing elements of negative reinforcement that are already in the deposit contract. So we hypothesize higher uptake of customizable deposit compared to fixed and higher uptake of matched deposit compared to not matched deposits. So the method that we used was the same. We used the same application. This time we recruited 142 healthy students. Again, the same intervention for 20 days. Now the tailored step goal when no data was available was more achievable, 5,000 steps based on our results of the previous experiment. We also only used gain frame feedback because that's what appeared to work best for our population. And the deposit was either fixed, pay 10 euros again beforehand, or customizable, so pay whatever you want between 1 and 20 euros. Matching was either present or not present. And we had a 2x2 design with 4 conditions. Primary outcome this time was uptake. So going into the results, with regards to uptake, we see that we replicate the finding of our first experiment. We see limited uptake of the fixed, not matched condition, that this is the condition where people just deposit 10 euros, take it or leave it. However, when we look at the other conditions, we see that the uptake drastically improved due to the matching and due to the customization that was offered. So statistically significant differences. Customizable, thank you for the notification. Customizable deposits will have a higher uptake. We found indeed that to be the case. The 2 blue bars compared to the 2 gray ones are significantly different from each other. Secondly, we matched deposits indeed had a higher uptake than not matched deposits, the 2 blue bars compared to the 2 gray ones. So also that hypothesis was accepted. Interestingly, with regards to effectiveness, we did not find significant differences between the groups. All groups performed relatively well compared to the previous experiment. However, when we look at the intervention cost per participant, we see that in some cases we earned money. So in the not matched conditions, the first two bars, we earned between 2 and 3 euros per participant for the whole experiment. That's because people lost their deposit partially. However, we lost money on the matched conditions. So where we provided matching, we lost between 8 and 13 euros per participant. So there's a significant difference, not in effectiveness, but in the cost of these different groups. Discussion. Matching increases the uptake. We've shown that, possibly because of people now have the opportunity to win money. So there's a better mix of reinforcement. However, they are expensive to provide. So one creative solution to provide matching without having to externally fund it would be to use the money lost by others. And I think that's where StepBed has a smart and creative solution to provide matching without having to provide it themselves. Customization also increases uptake of a deposit, possibly through an increase in feelings of autonomy over the intervention structure. And it's not caused by lower deposit amounts, because on average, we see still that when people are in a customizable, not matched condition, they deposit around 10 euros. So the incentive size is not necessarily different. And it's free to provide. So maybe a more attractive tweak to a deposit contract. Surprisingly, we didn't find differences in effectiveness. We did expect to find that, since in some conditions, people were incentivized with a total incentive of about 40 euros, whereas in some conditions, in the fixed condition, not matched, people had a 10 euro incentive. So 4 times as small, but there was not a difference in effectiveness. It could be that just the fact that people had to make a deposit via a digital bank transfer was already very stimulating, creating a ceiling effect where the differential effects were not visible. Okay, to summarize the two experiments, deposit contracts are promising. They use the power of financial incentives, but for free. The framing needs to be studied further. For healthy students, a gain frame in our case appeared to work best, in contrast to other studies with other populations. Uptake, however, is a key challenge, and it can be improved by allowing for customization, which is free to offer, or by matching the incentive or the deposit, but that's an expensive intervention. So getting back to Odysseus, I think Odysseus, would he have been alive today, would have been very proud to know that his ancient technique for dealing with temptation is still the subject of scientific study. I want to thank all of our collaborators, and that's it from my side.
Thank you very much, David, for your nice, coherent, and very interesting presentation and a nice wrap up at the end. With an eye to the time, I have 2 quick questions for you. Raoul Nuiten has a question and Stefan Lipman has a question. So perhaps we start with Raoul. Seeing you were first.
Yeah, quick question, David. So the study design in the second experiment did not seem to be balanced, or did I misread your graph?
No, I think you're right. If you're referring to the fact that we allocated more people to the fixed condition, the fixed not matched condition, we knew beforehand, based on the results of our first experiment, that uptake would be limited there. And in order to have enough power to analyze the effects on behavior, we decided to allocate around 30% more people to that condition. That ended up so we ended up doing effectiveness analysis on the kind of the same amount of people per arm. That's the reason that we allocated more people there.
All right, makes sense. Thank you.
Stefan?
I was wondering, seeing as the timing of your experiments seemed to be just around when the country went into lockdown the first time and also the second time around, if that could explain perhaps some of the apparent ceiling effects that you could have for goal attainment.
Yeah, I think the timing of the intervention was very tricky. We were designing everything when COVID was still not very present, and when we launched the intervention, it coincided with the lockdown, and I think that could have created the opportunity for people to move more, or could have created, let's say, space for behavior change. On the other hand, it could have also limited people's ability or willingness to go out and make steps. So there were some participants that rejected or reclined to participate because they didn't feel safe going to the gym or going outside. Going to the gym was not possible at all, but they would not even feel safe to be walking outside. So yeah, it could go both ways. In explaining the ceiling effects, that could be the case if people are very open to behavior change in a lockdown situation and they have much time to spare and they can take many walks. That could have been an explanation for a ceiling effect, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
For many people, it was the only exercise still available, perhaps.
Yeah. I think you're definitely right. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this discussion. Jamie, may I invite you to lead us through the final talk of the day, your presentation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Veronica. It's great to meet you and to be here. I really appreciate the invitation, even though I was part of the people making the invitations. So I'm excited to tell you about a real life implementation of what David was just speaking about. Just by way of background, I'm the founder and CEO of a company in New York called Waybetter. And what I'm about to talk to you about is our second product. It's a game called Step Bet. Let me just see, how do I take control of this? Okay, hopefully that works. So Step Bet is, as the name suggests, a game that motivates people to step more using a bet. I can sound smarter in this context by calling it a deposit contract, but it's probably not as sexy of a name to call it a step deposit contract. And so we basically developed this idea and basically turned it into a healthy product and a healthy business. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the process of doing that and the challenges that we had. It was not a straightforward path. So let's see here. Okay, let me go back to our first product for a second. In 2013, we launched a game called Diet Bet, which was a friendly competition to lose weight with money on the line, where basically people pooled a bet or deposit contract into the pot, and everyone who reached the stated goal, which is typically 4% in 4 weeks, was considered a winner. We had a verification methodology, and they would split the pot evenly with all the other winners, and we would keep a cut of the pot as our fee. It worked really well as a product. It really worked really well as in terms of a business. And so a couple of years later, we decided we wanted to experiment with a new game, leveraging the same concepts. And this is around the time, as you probably all remember, when Fitbits were very popular. The Apple Watch was about to come out, and we thought it would be great to gamify and motivate people to take more steps every day. And so the idea for Step Bet was born. I'd like to walk you through the process of going through, taking this idea and this concept of basically swapping out weight or kilos or pounds in the Diet Bet game and dropping in steps. It turns out it was not nearly as straightforward as we had hoped it might be. So just walk you through some of the game mechanics decisions that we had to make. So suppose that you are David, you're just wrapping up your PhD, spending many years investigating how to motivate people to walk more every day. You've done some successful studies, maybe even because one of your studies was actually earning money. You decide you're going to go in and build an app and do this as a business. That's great. I hope what I'm about to tell you doesn't dissuade you guys all from leaving your jobs and going and starting companies, because it may be an advertisement for staying with your jobs. But the first thing that David would have to do for designing this app is he's going to make this into a game, is figure out, like any good game or good sport, what are the goals? How do you win? In Diet Bet, we had a very simple goal. It was, for the most part, we had other formats, but the most popular one was, as I mentioned, 4% in 4 weeks. Lose 4% of your starting weight in 4 weeks. It was perfect. It was a healthy amount of weight to lose. We consulted with a lot of experts about this. 1% of your starting weight each week over the course of 4 weeks, a healthy amount of weight to lose, manageable. It's not too easy. It's not too hard. And so, one of the first things we considered, as David was mentioning, he had considered this as well, is setting an arbitrary number of steps, like 10,000 steps a day. Or in their case, or the Patel experiment that he talked about was 7,000 steps a day. We quickly rejected that idea. It felt wrong to us. Felt like some people, if you're a marathon runner, get 10,000 steps before breakfast, and that's not going to be very motivational to you. There's other people, most people who are, maybe at a baseline of 4,000 or 5,000 steps a day, and 10,000 steps is going to be demotivational. And on top of that, may even feel judgmental, sort of annoying. Like, you should be doing 10,000 steps, and here you are. And so we didn't want to piss people off by coming up with an arbitrary number like that. We considered the possibility of setting goals based on your history. So looking back at a history of how many steps you've been taking, and then coming up with a personalized goal for that. And we kind of rejected that idea, at least initially, as being too technically challenging. How were we going to get access to all your history of steps in the time it would take to come up with a good goal for you? And so we came up initially with what we thought was a super clever idea, which was, let's come up with dynamic goals, and we'll set a weekly baseline. And then each week after that, your goals are based on your past week's steps. And each week, the idea was to get more steps than last week. We thought, okay, this is really clever. It's progressive. It's helpful to people. It's great. It wasn't so great. Oops, let me go back a second here. It turns out, not surprisingly in hindsight, that people gamed us and they outsmarted us, because we told them that they were setting their own baseline of steps in the first week. So not surprisingly, they sandbagged their first week, meaning they intentionally took fewer steps. So we were actually motivating the exact opposite thing we were hoping to do, getting people to take fewer steps. And then what we found, that people are smart, the second week, they would do the exact number of steps they needed to beat their past week, to reach their goal. And then they would take off their Fitbit and just put it in a drawer somewhere, because they didn't want to set goals for the following week that were going to be overly hard. So basically, we succeeded in creating a game to create burst incentives and get people to underwalk relative to what they were doing before. So that didn't work. It's an expression in the United States, we were too clever by half. So I'll explain to you later, what we did. In short, we ended up doing the technically challenging thing of trying to figure out your step history and coming up with personalized goals based on that. So the second question that David is going to have when he's thinking of inventing a product that is based on his research is, what are the frequency of goals, right? So, we considered the idea of daily goals. Every day you have to hit a certain number of goals. And we thought that might feel too much like homework. And we wanted this thing to feel like a fun game. And if every day you had to do certain things, we felt like maybe that would just be too intense for people and they weren't going to like it. We considered and actually tested out monthly goals. And so we said, we picked a basic number, how many steps you needed to do in the course of a month. But, that had a lot of flexibility to it. You could take the steps whenever you wanted in the course of the month to achieve your goal. But it was really hard for people to wrap their heads around these numbers, right? You're halfway done. Congratulations, only 235,000 steps to go. It's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do with that information? So that wasn't, it turns out, a very good way of doing it. So we ended up deciding in the early days on a weekly goal, which seemed friendly and flexible. Get in your steps whenever you want, just hit this number by the end of each week. And the game would last multiple weeks, but each week you had a specific goal to hit. It turned out it was too friendly and too flexible. And what we found was that people were falling behind during the week. They wouldn't get, the increased number of steps they needed to. And then they were catching up and sort of cramming, like students for the test on the weekends. And Saturday or Sunday, they were getting these enormous number of steps. So they do 5,000, a day, Monday to Friday, and then they do 25,000 on Saturday or Sunday. And that also wasn't the behavior we were shooting for. On top of that, it brought into our view the possibility that people might be cheating. You'd see someone get 60,000 steps on Sunday after a week of doing 5,000 steps or something like that, and you'd wonder, like, are they putting their Fitbit on their dog or something like that? So we didn't know if people were cheating, but we felt like that wasn't a great solution. Another thing that we had to consider, how long is this game going to last, right? So we thought 4 weeks. That's what Diet Bet is. That worked really well. But in the case of walking, it felt a little easy. We thought maybe 8 to 12 weeks, sort of establishing more of a longer term habit pattern would be better. We'd also have the side benefit for us of weeding out certain players and bringing the win rate down a bit. And that sounds like a strange thing to say. You know, if our goal as a business is to get people to walk more, why would we want people to lose? And why would we want the win rate to not be, 100%? And that goes to the business model. And in Diet Bet, we had about a 50% win rate to sort of naturally. That's just kind of out of the gate when we launched that initial game of 4% of your weight loss, 4% of your weight lost in 4 weeks. And that worked out really well because we were able to give back all the winners an even amount of the pot from all the money that the other 50% were forfeiting by not reaching their goals. And there was still enough money in that for us to take out a cut for ourselves. We took out 25% of the pot, and 25% was passed along to the winners, and everyone was happy. The people who didn't win weren't particularly happy, but they just lost their bet. The people who did win got a nice return on their investment, and we were able to make a fee for running the game, which worked out for us. And so when we actually decided to launch this game, we wanted the win rate to be somewhere, 50%, 60, 70%, something like that. We actually considered a concept of tontines, which behavioral economists in the audience will certainly know, which is this idea where it's like a game of Survivor, where the game lasts as long as it has to last until we get down to 50% of the people who are still in. We thought that was really fun and clever, but we also felt like it might feel to people like a death march, where we're just going to keep on walking you until you can't stand it anymore, and then finally there's enough people who have dropped out that we can call the game over. And it really violated our core philosophy that we wanted the game to feel positive and collaborative with the other players, and not like a cutthroat competition. So we rejected the idea of a tontine. So we ended up testing various durations. And one of the things we found, as we kind of predicted, was that 4 weeks was just too easy. We were seeing too many winners. That was a problem. 8 to 12 weeks worked better. And it was sort of better for our business because we had a lower win rate, so we could take a bigger cut of the pot for ourselves and still have some money left over to split up among the winners as a return on their investment. But in another way, it was bad for our business because the games lasting 2 or 3 months meant that we couldn't run these games very often. If you have a casino where you can only get your customers to bet 6 times a year, that's not a casino that's going to stay in business very long. So we ended up going with 6 weeks. We had some other messy implementation issues. We had to figure out, how do we calculate these goals? Once we decided we were going to do it based on your step history, do we ignore outliers, days where you maybe didn't walk at all or only got 500 steps, or maybe your Fitbit battery died, or other days where you did in a crazy amount of steps? Should we just consider those, ignore those, consider those as meaningless outliers? And also, how far back do you look in history? Do you look a month or 2 or a year? And what are the actual step goals? Once we know your baseline, should it be 10%, 20% or more? Is it the same every day? What if players don't have a step history? How do you deal with that? We actually decided not to give default goals, as David was saying he did. We actually said, if you don't have step history, come back later. If you have a brand new Fitbit, it doesn't have any history, we're sorry, we can't help you. We ended up having to go through the trouble of integrating with all these wearables, which was not easy. A lot of work at figuring out how to integrate with Garmin and Fitbit and Google and Samsung. And if people didn't see their particular wearable integrated, they got annoyed with us. We also had this issue that came up later with repeaters. After someone had done this, you give them the same increase in goals for their next game, and then for their next game, to the point where they can't do anything all day but walk just to reach their step bet goal. So obviously we didn't want to do that. We also found that a surprising issue with step bet trackers for women. When women joined the game, a lot of them used their phone as a tracker, because the phone has an accelerometer, it keeps tracks of your steps, which was great, except the behavior that we ended up changing was that instead of leaving their phone in their bag while they went to the bathroom or went to do errands, they would just carry their phone with them everywhere. And suddenly they got, double the number of steps they were getting before without actually taking any more steps, just because they're now carrying their phone everywhere. So we basically stopped and stepped back and said, okay, let's just decide what's best for our users in terms of making this game good, what's best for outcomes, and let's work backwards from that. And so we ended up deciding on a few things. We just stuck a stick in the sand and said, we're going to do 90 days of historical data. We're going to look backwards. If you don't have that, you can't play. We hybridized the goals to be partly weekly, partly daily, where every week you had to hit certain goals for certain days of the week, 4 days each week. You had to get a baseline called active. 2 days a week, you had to hit a higher goal where you had to do something special out of the ordinary, like go for a run or hike. And then 1 day each week, you got a day off to use as you wish. The goal algorithm was smart, so it got rid of some of the outlier data and also recognized if you're playing multiple games, not to penalize you for winning the past games. And we ended up, as I mentioned, 6 weeks. And that we chose a bet amount by default as $40. And we end up keeping 12.5% as our cut. Eventually we moved that up to 15%. And it was great, it worked really well. You can read this yourself since we're, I think, short on time, but 78% of people won their games. People, were walking close to 50% more every day. People were repeating like crazy. More than half the people who played repeated. They also engaged with the other players more than they had to. There was no requirement to interact with the social feed inside the app, but people were doing it. And people just really loved it, which was great. And we got a lot of feedback that this was changing people's lives. So that was awesome, but we couldn't pop the champagne quite yet because it wasn't a viable business. This was a big problem for us a couple of years into the development. We still didn't have a business that made sense because $40 people betting, which we keep 12.5%, meant we got $5 every time someone played in this game. And most of that was getting eaten up in transaction fees with credit cards and PayPal and also customer service. We just weren't making enough money to make this a viable business. And it's not a viable business. There's no impact on the world. And so the saving grace that we figured out was to add on a subscription model. So we basically gave people the option to become a member of a step bet. They pay $50 a year, and that gets them access to a whole bunch of cool member-only perks, like more variety in the games, longer, shorter, easier, harder, different bet sizes. They can play in 3 games at a time. And in the games that are member-only games, we don't take a cut of the pot because we're making our money from your subscription fee. Now we have about 20,000 people who are paying us $50 a year. Plus we have many other people who are joining us as non-members. So it's become a healthy business, self-funding.
And Jamie, as I understood, you've had over 1 million people participating in the game. Is that correct? In games you offer?
Yes. In total, we've had
in
over
total, yeah.
And I can tell that that's the music playing for me to walk off the stage. I'm on the second to last slide. One interesting question that popped out was as you start getting some success, you start running into cheaters. We just recently saw a bunch of people in India playing in a sort of criminal ring. It's not a big deal, but we shut them down. We also had lots of technical issues. Just a couple months ago, Garmin was held for ransom, their data. It was a ransomware thing, and all of our Garmin users suddenly couldn't access their data. And so these are the numbers at the end of the day. It's my last slide. Sorry for running late. At least there's no one left to talk after me. But we've had over 200,000 players in the game, almost 1 million plays, and we've paid out in winnings to about $31 million, $32 million. Anyway, thanks very much. Sorry for running over. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jamie, for this impressive talk. And you've shown us very clearly how we can think things out in academia, but in practice, things are messy and difficult. Any questions? There are no questions in the chat.
Can I ask one, Veronica? So I was thinking about Koen's question. So I enter into a stick commitment contract, but how do you get me to start another one? I think that question is also relevant to step bet. So when people fail in a challenge or win, but there's an outcome of the challenge. So how do you get, especially I think failures, to recommit and to enter into another game? That will be a question to you, Jamie. How do you look at that?
Yeah, it's tricky. We see basically a 2-to-1 repeat rate among people who play and win and people who don't win. Well, number one, we don't call them losers. If they don't win, they are runners up, something we learned early on. So we don't stigmatize this. You may have actually taken a lot more steps than you were, or you may have lost a fair amount of weight. We shouldn't feel like that's a bad thing. You may not have reached your goal, but you're not a loser. And we have their email addresses. We remind them that, there's opportunities to get back on the horse and do this again. We see a lot of people who come back to us, as we were just talking about in an earlier presentation, around January, when they feel the need to have some extrinsic motivation and something power up, stimulate their need and support around sticking to healthy new habits. So a lot of times people will, play once, we won't hear from them for the rest of the year, and then we'll see them show up again in January. But it's always a challenge for us to get them to come back. That's the reality.
I had one idea based on research that I read about attributions after failing in a challenge. So people have lifestyle goals, and when they fail or succeed, they make an attribution. What was the reason that I failed? And these attributions, this work by one of our colleagues, can either be external, so it was caused by some circumstance, or internal, it was caused by me being a loser. Let's say you don't want to call them that, but that would be an interesting idea for research to see if you can stimulate people to make external attributions and understand that circumstances might also have caused them to fail, instead of undermining their self-efficacy by them having internal attributions. And but that would be a research question, actually, to see if that could stimulate people to start another challenge despite the fact that they failed. So I don't think you can answer it. I think Koen might have a question.
And Fiona as well. So we'll go to Koen first, and then Fiona to you.
Okay, just a quick question. Very interesting presentation, JB, and nice to see this journey that you've been through. I have a question about the business model. Is it now the primary source of income the subscriptions? Is that true, or the amount of money that people fail?
So we're still making the most amount of money from our cut of the pot, this sort of legacy business model. It's not strictly when people fail, incidentally. I mean, we don't make any more money or less money depending on whether people fail, assuming that it's below the rate that we keep. So 50% of people fail or 40% of people fail, we make the exact same amount of money. We keep in the case of StepBet, it's 15% cut. In the case of DietBet, it's 25% cut. But we've just recently launched in the past year a new app called the Waybetter app, and that's strictly subscription based. We don't want to be in the business anymore of worrying about win rates. We actually would like to see our business model aligned with that of our users. What we want them to succeed, we know they come back and play more, and so we are trying to align our business model to not care about that at all.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. Fiona, the final question.
Yeah, I'll make it quick as well. I'm actually interested in the business side as well, and about how you actually make decisions and how you tweak your things. So of course, once you've run one version of it, I guess you can make decisions from what happened there, but running a whole research about it every time always takes time. And you have said multiple times, like, yeah, we felt like we didn't want to do this or this. So is it really many decisions made out of like personal feelings or discussing with a team, or like how do you make your decisions? That's basically the question.
Yeah, it's a great question. We ask ourselves that question a lot. So one thing is we do talk to researchers and scientists in this world, and we definitely get input from them, and we try to keep up on what new interesting applications there are of the science. But the reality is, we talk to our customers a lot and get feedback for what they want and try to address that, obviously. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned, we were experimenting with a lot of different approaches. And at some point, we just said, we're going around in circles. It's taking too long. Let's just try to decide what's going to result in the best outcomes for people, with the idea that if our end users succeed in their journey, we will succeed as a business. We'll figure it out. We didn't even know that we had a subscription model in mind when we decided that. We just said, let that be the beacon for us, and let's drive towards efficacy. And everything we need to do drives towards that. So if there's some idea that someone has that will lower the win rate or do something like this, we'll say, no, that's not in the long-term interest of our users. Let's try to make decisions based on the long-term interest of our users, and the money will follow. But the reality is we do a lot of tests. We talk to a lot of users. We do research. And in some cases, it took years for us to figure a lot of these game mechanics out, because if you want to run a 12-week game and see what the win rates are and ask people if they enjoyed it, you got to wait 12 weeks, as you all know from doing lab experiments. It takes a lot of time to kind of get feedback and apply that feedback. So at some point, we just go with our gut and what we think is going to be best for our users.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I think I would like to invite all of you. Well, we can't have drinks, but for those who would like to stay on and ask more questions, please feel free. I will officially close the symposium now. And David, I talked to you at the very beginning, and I said, so when do you feel this symposium has been a success? What would make it a success? And you said, well, if we've really shown how academia and industry go hand in hand and how we can learn from each other. And I think you have succeeded very well. And it has been a great insight in the chat. There's people saying they've enjoyed it very much. Thanks to all the people organizing this. Thanks to all the speakers for this wonderful afternoon. Feel free to stay on for a bit. Jamie, I have a question for you, if you are willing to hang in there a little bit more. And thanks to all people in the audience. Thank you very much.
I'm happy to stick around, by all means.
Nice. Well, I was just wondering, like Jeroen said, the idea with the stickers, and then Jeroen said, well, maybe it depends on what you write on there in terms of COVID vaccination uptake. Perhaps if you write hug me because, I am sort of in the clear, what role do you see for social incentives? Do you think those work, or what's your idea on that?
Well, first of all, I would say the social piece of this has been the biggest surprise to me personally over the years of doing this. So, initially I started the company thinking we're going to apply behavioral economics and gamify this and win, carrots and sticks. But we created a place where people could interact with other people in the game. And the fact that they were meeting strangers who are on the journey with them and feeling like they could be in a group of people who understood them, particularly with weight loss, which is such a stigmatized issue, that it was really powerful. The social element, if you interviewed the people who succeeded on our platform, tens of thousands of them, and asked them, like, what was it that made it possible for you to really sustainably change your BMI to become healthy and to change your entire lifestyle to be healthy, they would say it was the supportive community that they found, and more than anything else.
So do you reckon, was it, oh, sorry, yeah?
No, it's okay. Now, for instance, in this losing weight with pre-commitments, which we do, it's pretty severe, the financial payment afterwards, and it's a punishment as well, because you have to pay the 650 euros if you don't succeed. But to be honest, I still believe it's not just about money. It's to a large extent also about that you don't want to explain to your family that you did not succeed, and don't want to explain in the group why you did not make it, well, let's say 2/3 does. So there's a lot of social elements as well. You should get them working all in the same direction. But it's a lot of testing. I like, Jamie, what you explained about. We thought about this one, recognizable as well. Test this one, does not work, etc. It's good.
Yeah, very nice. Any other thoughts anyone would like to share?
Yeah, Jamie, I think I showed that customizing could increase the uptake of your product. Would that be a feasible thing to implement?
We're doing it now, actually, as an experiment. We just started allowing people to decide whether they want to bet or not in these games. And at some point, we might have variable bet sizes. And so I'm optimistic that based on this research, offering some autonomy and customization around how you want to bet or whether you want to bet will optimize results.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
And I should mention also, the way our apps work in general is there's a marketplace of different games you can join, particularly in the weight loss ones. And some of them have higher bet sizes, lower bet sizes, longer term, more aggressive weight loss goals, shorter term. And so people do get to personalize automatically by just simply going in and choosing the game that they want to participate in. And there's other aspects of the games, like who's leading the game. We have this concept of coaches, which I didn't talk about. But if I really love this coach, I find them motivational. That's another element that people will use to customize their experience.
And are they all competitive games, Jamie, or are they also cooperative games?
We think of them as more cooperative, like friendly competitions, like a fun run. You either win at the end by completing all the challenges, or you lose. There's never a concept of you won, came in first place or second place or third place, and those people win something like a big check, big lottery type of thing, and everyone else loses. The way it works is, even if every single person wins in our games, we have a provision in place called the no-lose guarantee. We will forfeit our cut of the pot and any costs associated with running the game, including the transaction fees. And in that unusual circumstance, it does happen, less than 1% of the time, if every single person wins, they will at least get all their money back. So you never in a situation where you put your money down, complete all the things we've asked of you, and then win less back than you put in, and almost 100% of the time you win back more. So it's not about the money, as I think we discussed, as one of my fellow panelists discussed. You really want to encourage people to be driven by the intrinsic motivation more than just the opportunity to make money. Although the fun of betting on yourself is definitely a big part of the excitement of the game.
Yeah, so that's go for it, David.
No, sorry, Veronica. But so you could think of an even more cooperative form where people have, how do you say, an interdependent goal. So if let's say I have a group of friends and I want to lose weight together, then we set a shared goal and we depend on each other. So if one isn't up to his game, our friend group will stimulate him, because then we won't achieve our shared interdependent weight goal. That could be a more extreme cooperative option, but I guess that has very different game mechanics.
We're actually looking to add that. The idea would be that you're still playing as an individual. You win or lose, and you're entitled to your cut of the pot if you win or not. But if you do join as a game, sort of like a meta game inside the game, if you join as a game, let's say with 5 or 10 people, and a certain percentage of you all reach the goal, you're entitled to a bonus prize, a t-shirt or something like that. This way, if someone on your team, or several people on your team decide that they're not going to be up to their game, as you put it, it doesn't demotivate everyone else. It feels like, they're dependent on this person. It creates undue pressure and stress on everyone. So we think we maybe can get the best of both worlds there.
Yeah, what we still like is this idea, David, is that you've got a team of people. And then, for instance, if one person quits smoking, then you're going to make this bet that you're going to go to London for the weekend, and the other ones will pay for it, but no one will go if you don't succeed. So then that gives some tension. And I also like the idea, but also social question, interesting dynamics, etc., etc. And I still like the idea that you just have 10 people who have to do something, lose weight or stop smoking or whatever, and then you say we all put in money in the pot to go skiing for a weekend, but then we only go with the people who make it, and then the other ones just get pictures. That would really be something that you say, this will not happen, that I just get pictures and I've paid for this skiing week.
Yeah, we
Like
talked about that,
Jeroen,
in terms of doing nasty chores for someone. So if you with a group of friends, and then you would have to, I don't know, clean out someone's garbage or do something you really dislike.
Yeah,
you do it for
I
someone
like those
else.
sort of things.
Yeah,
a combination of some social pressure, some fun, but also that it still feel, but I won't have this.
Yeah, exactly. Because it makes me wonder, what is it that really incentivizes people? Is that the money, or is it the competition, or is it the challenge, or is it the social part, meeting other people who are doing the same thing?
My answer to that question from all these years of doing it is there's no one answer to that. It's a very heterogeneous spectrum of things that motivate different people. And if you can kind of have a full spectrum approach to motivation, that's ideal. Some people will say, I'm a lone wolf. We talk to our customers. I just care about hitting my goal. I don't really want to interact with other people. I don't want this whole group therapy conversation that's happening in the app. Doesn't matter to me. Other people will say, I don't really care about making or losing my money. That's, it's nice if I win some money. But what really matters to me is the social support and the vibe that I get from being with all these people who are completely, supporting me and empathic towards me and vice versa. So it's interesting to see that people really respond to different elements and in the same game.
Yeah, I can recognize that. You can adjust a little bit. It's also like in regular games. You've got different game types. But to be honest, that I also like this, which is the proper one, and then you state it's all of the above. So when, let's say, the group pressure and the humor and the money, when they all point in the same direction, that might help. Then we'll see what does the trick. But the combination helps. And I like the fact that what happens when you change both the environment and persons themselves, because otherwise it will not last. So we've got a lot of discussions also, even ideologically. This should start from persons themselves or from environment, or it's done for, but eventually if you want to change, you should change both. So it's not about which is the proper one, it's about ensuring that you've got both over the long run. It can start at one place, can start with yourself, can start with your environment, but eventually the combination is the best one, and not, let's say, either do A or B.
Well, you've seen the influence of the environment in the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, to be honest, when you look upon environment and the way that shapes behavior, but specifically because people look around and they make rules based on what other people do. That's how we work. That's of course massive, and that's the massive impact there.
I would say from our perspective, it's hard to change people's environments, or impossible maybe. However, what our users have oftentimes told us is that they can't change the way their coworkers act. The coworkers are still going to go out smoking, and they're still going to go out, drinking and eating unhealthy meals after work and things like that. It's really hard to get someone to change their environment unless they quit and change their jobs or something. But if you give them a virtual community, a circle of friends who are all going through the same thing, they can lean on those virtual friends and say, like, they can share pictures, for example, of the cupcakes that someone brings to work, to celebrate someone's birthday. And they can all say, oh, that's the worst, to have to sit next to those cupcakes all day and not eat any. And the fact is, the environment is actually assaulting them, but in a toxic sort of way. But they get this antidote, it's like the angel and the devil. They have all these people who are now able to say to them, we're all dealing with the same thing. It's Halloween in the US.
Yeah, I agree.
Cheering them on. Yeah.
Yeah, and this losing weight with pre-commitment, what happens is you've got people who all have, let's say, BMI of 30. They're all, you can see that they're overweight. It's not this, but they're all overweight. And then they suddenly see themselves ending up in a fitness club. Most of them never been there. So they look around, I'm not the only one. They're sitting in this group. Yeah, that helps. That's what does it. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, nice.
Any final thoughts?
Yeah.
From anyone here?
Thank you all. Nice. And
well done.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeroen. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everybody who's still here.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Nice.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Talk to you soon. I will stop the recording. I think I'm the host now, actually. So I'll stop the I should have